Stay tuned next for the Dramatized Bible.
This is the most amusing sight I've ever seen. Barber, both you and the tailor are to be congratulated. You've done a superb job. General, you will have them escorted to the border, just as they are. and herald their coming by trumpet, that our people may see and laugh too.
Hanan. King Hanan, son of Nahash, did this to my personal ambassadors?
It's true, Your Majesty. They were escorted to the border of Israel, the laughing stock of all the Ammonite people.
What you just heard, boys and girls, is a portion of the exciting story I have for you now.
Is it another of your David stories, Uncle Van?
Yes, it is. And if you'd like to look it up in your Bibles, you will find the story in 2 Samuel chapter 10. I call this story
A Prophecy Fulfilled.
After David was established on the throne of Israel, the nation enjoyed a long interval of peace. The surrounding nations, seeing the strength and unity of Israel, thought it wise to desist from open hostility. Finally, however, because of envy and jealousy, the nations round about Israel united to form a hostile alliance. The circumstances that brought about such an alliance were these.
Audience granted, General Joab. You may come forward.
Long live the king. Long live the king.
Yes, General.
Messengers have just arrived from the east, Your Majesty, with the news that King Nahash of the Ammonites is dead.
Nahash? He showed us many kindnesses when we were fugitives from Saul, remember?
Yes, indeed, Your Majesty.
And I suppose that Crown Prince Hanan has succeeded to the throne?
Yes, Your Majesty.
I remember him well. Quite an impressive young man, quick to anger and fearlessly unscrupulous. However, I shall send ambassadors to console Prince Hanan.
With His Majesty's permission, I should like to remind him that Hanan, if I know him at all, and I do, may not take well to your kindness. You know how quick he is to flare up, act rashly without the slightest cause. He may even harm your ambassadors, kill them.
Not if they go in my name. Royal ambassadors are free from attack. All nations recognize this obligation to royalty and abide by it.
I hope His Majesty is right.
May His Majesty Hanan live forever.
In the name of David, King of Israel, we greet Hanan, the great king of Ammon. David sends his personal sympathies in the bereavement of His Majesty, in the passing away of his father Nahash, who showed much kindness to David in days gone by. His Majesty David,
Who
therefore...
are you?
I am spokesman for these ambassadors, Your Majesty.
In Jerusalem, what is your position?
I am one of King David's personal attendants.
And these others?
Ministers of state, aide-de-camp to General Joab, princes from the various tribes of Israel, elders and wise men.
Quite an array of statesmen and influential men. You may tell David, your king, that I, Hanan, king of Ammon, appreciate his kind thoughtfulness, and... You there, what...
His Majesty's general insisted that I interrupt and beg permission for him to speak.
Tell him to wait until I have received these royal visitors and sent them on their way.
He begs permission to speak now, Your Majesty, before these ambassadors depart.
General, what is it you wish to speak to me about?
The true mission of these so-called ambassadors, Your Majesty.
All right, I'll hear you out. You may come forward.
Long live the king. Your Majesty, may I remind you how David deceived King Achish of the Philistines, who sheltered him from King Saul, even as did your father? Do you believe, then, that David would send these men here all the way from Jerusalem just to console you because of the death of your father?
Go on, General.
Is it not more logical to conclude that he has sent these ambassadors to spy out the city?
General, I think you're probably right. These men are spies. What do you suggest should be done with them?
Kill them. Hang them in the public marketplace.
Oh, no. Death is too good for them. I have a better idea. Yes. Send for the royal tailor and barber. Barber, see these men. They are spies sent here by David, king of Israel. Usually spies are put to death, but these men are special. Death is too good for them. They sneaked in posing as ambassadors, and
We are ambassadors, personal representatives of His Majesty King David, king of all Israel. Therefore, sire, I demand that we be given the usual courtesy, protection, and immunity accorded royal ambassadors.
Royal ambassadors, indeed.
Oh, I wouldn't harm you. Not a hair of your heads. You will be sent back to your king as healthy specimens and as alive as you are at this minute. Minus half your hair. Barber, shave off half of the hair on the heads and beards of these men. And Taylor, you will cut away half of each man's clothing. They will return to David only half dressed.
They'll be the laughing stock of everyone they meet on their way home.
If His Majesty carries out this threat of indecency, it will be a disgrace to King David and the nation of Israel.
Of course it will.
Our king and our nation will not be apt to let such a disgrace go unpunished.
Oh, every nation knows that your King David is a peace-loving man. He'll take this insult. He won't like it, of course, but he won't do anything about it, except perhaps sputter. Oh, I wish I could see it. David's carefully chosen spies returning into Jerusalem half naked. Their heads will pop out of windows. They will break out in convulsions of laughter. This is the most amusing sight I've ever seen. Barber, both you and the tailor are to be congratulated. You've done a superb job. General, you will have them escorted to the border, just as they are. and herald their coming by trumpet, that our people may see and laugh too.
Hanan. King Hanan, son of Nahash, did this to my personal ambassadors?
It's true, Your Majesty. They were escorted to the border of Israel, the laughing stock of all the Ammonite people. They now make their slow, shameful way here. Our people are trying to look the other way. Still, Your Majesty, they cannot ignore the insult that this act has heaped upon you and the people themselves.
But I sent the ambassadors to Hanan in kindness and respect, hoping to repay in part the kindness shown to me and my men when we were fugitives.
Ah, but Your Majesty does not understand the mind of the Ammonite. It is continually evil.
But they were kind to me.
Obviously, Your Majesty, only because they hated Saul and Saul hated you.
Still, I don't understand why. By international law, all nations respect and protect the ambassadors of other nations. Surely the Ammonites know this.
They hate Israel, Your Majesty. They hate Israel's God. Hatred prompts their actions, controls their minds, even as it did many years ago when Nahash demanded the privilege of gouging out all the right eyes of the defeated Israelite people. Yeah. They can have no conception of the generous spirit that prompted your message of goodwill to their new king.
Well, I think I realize all this, Joab, but I'm a little perplexed that God would permit them to carry out the evil. But now I think God wishes us to realize the real character of the Ammonites, so we'll not make an alliance with them. It certainly is not God's will that Israel enter into league with the treacherous heathen Ammonites.
Shall I prepare the army for prompt retaliation?
No. First of all, Joab, send swift messengers to the returning ambassadors. Instruct them to remain in Jericho until their beards and hair have grown out again.
Immediately, sire.
As for the prompt retaliation by force, I'll let the events of the future and God decide that for me. However, I want the Ammonite king to know that I'm sorely displeased with their insult to my ambassadors. In my sight, and the sight of God, their action reeks of evil, hostile intent.
With pleasure, Your Majesty.
You say David is displeased with the way I treated his ambassadors?
Yes, Your Majesty.
Well, I thought he would be. Well, I have news for David. I hate him, despise him and his God.
It may mean war, all-out war, sire. David will surely avenge the wrong done his ambassadors.
Oh, I doubt that, General. David is a peace-loving man. He wouldn't wage war unless he was forced to.
I've learned, Your Majesty, that Israel is out to control the land and peoples all the way to the Euphrates River.
Impossible. Israel conquer us, Syria, and all the other nations from the Jordan to the Euphrates? It's absolutely impossible.
Israel is fast becoming a united and strong nation under the wise leadership of King David, sire.
You consider Israel a threat, a real threat?
Indeed I do, Your Majesty. The people of Israel love David. They are solidly united, and in unity there is strength. Besides all this, Your Majesty, the early fathers of Israel, Abraham, I believe, and Moses, predicted that Israel's boundaries someday would extend to the Euphrates. The Israelites believe in these predictions. Belief in their cause and love for their leader are an unbeatable combination, creating courage, energy, and a victorious spirit.
Oh. Have your spies detected any military activity in Israel?
No, Your Majesty, but I should like to point out that there is no time like the present for an attack. Daily, Israel grows stronger and stronger. If we or any nation are ever to crush Israel, it must be now.
I think I agree. Yes. Do we have the men and weapons to defeat the Israelites?
Your Majesty, that is debatable. We could lose. It would be a closely contested battle.
We need reinforcements, allies.
If this could be arranged in large enough numbers, we would be assured of victory.
It shall be accomplished. Money can do anything. General, my envoys to surrounding nations have returned with good news. Altogether, I've been able to muster some 33,000 troops, including charioteers, cavalry, and foot soldiers. Is this enough with our own men to crush Israel?
It is indeed a formidable army, Your Majesty. I can promise His Majesty the complete and utter destruction of the Israelites.
Good.
You may come forward, General Joab.
Long live the king.
Your request for an audience mentioned grave tidings from the north and east.
Yes, Your Majesty. Great forces of enemy troops are converging on the Ammonite capital. Obviously, a vast coalition to crush and destroy us.
This, as we all realized, was inevitable. Now it's here, Joab. We'll not wait for them to invade our country. Instead, we'll march at once and fight on their soil. I warn you, Joab, a powerful enemy will be arrayed against you. It'll take boldness and courage to attack. Be wise in your boldness. Fight bravely. Give no quarter. Yet remember, we're God's people. Palestine is God's land, so the battle belongs to Him. Depend on Him, and He'll be your strength and your fortress. He will give you victory.
Bugler! All a halt! Captain, find my brother Abishai and ask him to come here.
Yes, sir.
You sent for me, sir?
Well, no need to be quite so formal, is there, brother?
No. All right, Joab, what do you want?
Well, as you well know, Abishai, we deliberately, knowingly walked into a trap. Before us are the hordes of Ammonite soldiers. To the southwest of us, arrayed on favorable ground for chariot and cavalry fighting, are the Syrian forces.
We are surrounded by the enemy, aren't we? If we fight the Ammonite troops in front of their city walls, we will be attacked in the rear by the Syrian troops. And if we attack the Syrians, the Ammonites will come at us from the rear. Well, perhaps it is a trap.
It could be a trap, Abishai. Or it could be the other way around. There are dangers and advantages in the way the army has arrayed themselves against us. Which would you say is the stronger, the Ammonites in front of the city wall or the Syrians on the plain to the southwest of us?
Because of their position, the Ammonites, definitely. If the battle goes against them, all they need do is retreat into the safety of their walled city. It would take a long and costly siege to rout them.
Then our course is clear. We will split 2 divisions.
Split our army?
You will be in charge of one division, I the other.
Your objective is clear and wise. We cannot be attacked from the rear.
I shall take the more experienced and mighty men and battle the Syrian forces. If they be too strong for me, you send some of your men to help me. If the Ammonites be too strong for you, I will send some of my men to help you.
But if the Ammonites be the stronger of the 2 forces, why do you send the best of our forces against the Syrians?
If the Syrian forces are the weaker of the 2, they can be defeated the easier. The Ammonites by themselves are afraid of us. Otherwise, they would not have gone to all the trouble, time, and expense of gathering together such a vast army of allies.
I get it. If you can defeat the Syrians, get them on the run, the Ammonites will turn and run too.
No, the courage of the Ammonites is no greater than the strength of their allies.
Yes.
Now, gather your men together. Proceed to a position in front of the Ammonites. I shall do the same with the Syrians. At a given signal, the blowing of the trumpet, we will both attack at the same time.
Yes, sir.
Forward to the attack, men! And God go with you.
The battle rages fiercely, and Joab and his men, with God on their side, were too much for the Syrians, and they turned and fled before him. And when the Ammonites saw that the Syrians fled, they too fled, and entered into their city and closed the gates. And Joab and his victorious army returned to Jerusalem.
Congratulations, Joab. You and your men did a superb job.
Well, not as good as I had hoped to do, Your Majesty.
Well, you defeated them. What more can you ask?
Well, we didn't defeat them, sire, not really.
Huh?
The Syrians, suffering slight reverses, merely turned and fled. We couldn't follow them with any hope of success because with their horses and chariots they could outrun my foot soldiers. Then the Ammonites merely retired into their walled city. It would take a long and costly siege to rout them, so I just... Well, sire, I too turned and came home.
You did right, Joab. Exactly what I would have done.
But they are not defeated, Your Majesty. We still will have trouble with them.
Yes, you're probably right, Joab.
Already, my spies report renewed activity among the Ammonites and the Syrians, especially the Syrians. I understand that Hadadezer, king of the Jobah Syrians, is furious.
I want it thoroughly understood by my court that I will never countenance defeat by an enemy, any enemy. We were paid by the Ammonites to fight Israel. We were shamefully defeated. We'll fight the Israelites again, only this time on our own account and to restore the prestige we lost at Rabbah. Shobak, general of my army, step forward.
Yes, Your Majesty.
What do you think of the battle at Rabbah?
The Ammonite general bungled, sire. Had I been in complete charge, we would have won.
Then we will try again next year. This time you will be in charge. I expect victory, the complete and utter destruction of the Israelite nation.
My king shall get exactly that. There will no longer be in Israel a David or a Joab. This I guarantee.
We think alike, General. Send a call to arms to all nations and people from the forests of Lebanon in the north to the great Euphrates and beyond. How go the preparations for the battle with the Israelites, General?
Every king, both great and small, from Lebanon to the Euphrates, has answered your call to arms. Each is sending as many men and chariots and horses as he possibly can. We all meet at Helam, and there we will organize and train until every man is hard as iron and eager to fight. The Israelites shall be destroyed.
Is there anything more that I may bring for His Majesty?
No, thank you, Butler. You may retire. I wish to talk privately with the general.
Long live the king. Long live the king.
Joab, we've much to talk about and plan.
Well, may the God of Israel direct our minds as we discuss the plan His Majesty has in mind and bring it to a successful conclusion.
Sit down, Joab. Be comfortable.
As His Majesty wishes.
Forget for tonight that I'm your king. We've been through much together, you and I.
Yes. I remember the very day I joined your little band of fugitives. I was thrilled. Yes, we've gone through much together. Defeat and victory, sadness, joy. But I digress. Take up time that should be used in the planning of our strategy.
No, it's not a waste of time at all, Joab. We've gone through many crucial times together. But we have at least one more critical test to pass. A crisis. I think it's the most important, severe crisis we've ever faced. The very life of Israel is at stake. We must face this emergency squarely, immediately. And with God's help, we will win.
You mean the great enemy forces being enmassed across the Jordan?
Almost the entire world is arrayed against us, Joab. The nations have formed a huge coalition determined to crush us and the good name and power of our God.
The king doubts that we will win?
God is all-powerful. I doubt that not in the least. I doubt only Israel. Have we put away sin among us? Will we permit him to be our strength and our fortress? Will we call upon him for help? And will we rely only on him for victory? God will give us victory in this emergency, and in all things, if we do our part.
Is there anything I can do to reassure the king?
Yes. Yes, Joab, there is. I seek your permission to personally lead our army against the enemy.
Well, His Majesty need seek no one's permission to do whatever seems best to him.
Joab, as my general, you've been placed in complete charge of all Israel's forces. I don't wish to usurp your authority. I'm completely satisfied with you as Israel's general. Yet in the present case, I feel that my appearance on the battlefield as king will inspire the men.
It will be a pleasure to serve directly under your command. It will remind me pleasantly of days long ago.
Thank you, Joab. Now, the first thing to do is to send out spies, many of them, to keep us thoroughly informed of the enemy's actions. We want to know as much about them as possible.
It shall be done immediately, Your Majesty.
And so came men from cities and farms from all over Israel and gathered together to go up to battle.
The men are ready to do battle, Your Majesty. They are even eager to fight and forever be rid of the threat to national security. They are sure of victory.
So am I, Joab. If our hearts are right with God, and if we permit him to give us victory. And now, these are my plans, Joab. We'll not wait for the enemy to move. We'll choose the place and time of fighting. We will be ready to cross the river and march by sunup tomorrow.
Yes, sir.
I'll be first in the water, Joab, and lead the men across the Jordan. You take charge here, see that all goes well, and then you yourself bring up the rear.
Yes, sir.
So the armies of Israel passed over the river Jordan and came near to Helam.
Which of you is the general? I wish to speak with your general.
Quiet, men. I think I had someone calling. Quiet.
I am Shobach, general of the combined armies of all the enemy nations. I wish to speak with your general.
I'll speak with him, Joab. I am David, king of Israel. Say on.
I call upon you to surrender here and now and thus prevent useless bloodshed.
What are your terms of surrender?
Unconditional surrender.
So be it unto you, you idol-worshipping nations. We'll give no quarter nor expect any. For the Lord God of Israel has said that the land from the great sea, even to the Euphrates River, shall come under the dominion of Israel, and so shall it come to pass. Now, men of Israel, be of good courage, for the Lord God of Israel goes before us to subdue the enemy. Forward to the fray!
Soon the tide of battle went against the Syrian hosts, and they turned and fled, David and his men in hot pursuit. Shobach, captain of the Ammonite host, was sorely wounded.
Armor-bearer, I'm hit. Tell Hadadezer, my sovereign, that the Israelites are mightier than all nations combined. Tell him that I, his general, was the...
And when the battle was ended, over 40,000 enemy troops had been killed, including Shobach, their general. And David, along with his victorious army, returned to Jerusalem. And all the kings that had been tributary to Hadadezer sent envoys to David to make peace with him and to pay tribute into the treasury of Israel.
Well, Your Majesty, I guess that ends it. Israel is now in command of all the land between the Great Sea and the River Euphrates, fulfilling the prophecy of Abraham and Moses.
No, not quite, Joab. There still remain the Ammonites. But without the aid of other nations, they'll be more readily subdued. When the time of war again comes, I shall send you to destroy all the children of Ammon and to lay siege to Rabbah. Then shall come to pass the fulfillment of the prophecy that Israel, God's people, shall have dominion over all the land from the river Euphrates even to the Great Sea.